History, dear viewers, is not always what you read in textbooks. Behind those grand palace walls and proper ceremonies, things often went terribly, wonderfully wrong. Today we bring you 4 tales of magnificently spectacular mishaps. From the courts of Europe, where fountains refused to cooperate, another where musicians went sailing, and a certain genius played piano with his nose, while a monkey showed everyone proper tea etiquette. These stories will be interwoven with reimagined music from each era. Welcome to Historical Mishaps, when elegance met chaos. Our first tale, Handel's water music mishap. When King George I commissioned Handel to compose music for a royal water party on the Thames, everyone thought it was a splendid idea. What could possibly go wrong with putting an entire orchestra on a gently swaying barge? As it turns out, quite a lot. The evening began with great pomp as the musicians, dressed in their finest performance attire, boarded their floating concert hall. The first challenge appeared when they realized their chairs kept sliding across the deck with each ripple of the river. The cellists developed a peculiar technique of playing while bracing their instruments with their knees, looking rather like they were riding very formal horses. The royal barge led the way, with the musicians following in their own vessel. Everything went swimmingly, pun intended, until they hit the wake of a passing boat. The entire string section slid starboard, creating what witnesses described as a most unique interpretation of Handel's score. One particularly memorable moment came when a violinist, attempting to recover his balance, backed into a horn player. The bass player, already struggling with an instrument larger than himself, found his bow becoming an impromptu oar. During one particularly vigorous passage, he nearly conducted himself right over the side, saved only by 2 quick-thinking oboe players who grabbed his coattails. Handel himself, watching from the royal barge, was seen alternatively wincing and chuckling as his carefully composed music took on entirely new arrangements with each wave. The king, thoroughly enjoying both the intended and unintended entertainment, declared it a most memorable performance. The musicians, ever professional, continued playing even as they watched their dignity sail away on the evening breeze. Despite, or perhaps because of, these mishaps, the water music was deemed a tremendous success. It was performed again several times, though future performances wisely included safety rails and wig clips. Here's reimagined music inspired by the era. The Versailles Fountain Fiasco. Picture, if you will, the magnificent gardens of Versailles, where Louis XIV, the Sun King himself, had arranged the most spectacular fountain display ever attempted. The only tiny detail his engineers forgot to mention was that the fountains couldn't actually all work at once. The solution? A veritable army of servants hidden behind the shrubbery, manually pumping water and running between fountains. These poor souls were dressed in their finest livery, which, as it turns out, is not the most practical attire for sprinting through garden paths. The grand tour began with Louis leading his distinguished guests through the gardens. Behind the scenes, it was pure chaos. At the first fountain, everything went splendidly. But as the royal party moved on, a frantic game of human musical chairs commenced. "Quick, the king approaches the Apollo fountain," would come the whispered cry, followed by the sound of dozens of servants attempting to run silently while wearing formal shoes. One particularly unfortunate fellow got his wig caught in a hedge abandoned it, and continued pumping water while essentially bald on one side. The nobles, trying desperately to maintain decorum, couldn't help but notice the mysterious moving bushes and occasional panicked face popping out between the topiaries. One duchess was heard whispering, "Either these gardens are haunted by very well-dressed ghosts, or something peculiar is afoot." The comedy peaked when two servants, rushing in opposite directions, collided directly behind a hedge. The impact sent them sprawling onto the path right in front of the royal party. Louis XIV, ever the master of royal poise, simply raised an eyebrow and remarked, "I see my fountains inspire such enthusiasm that even the shrubbery wishes to dance." By the end of the tour, the servants were exhausted, several wigs were irretrievably lost to various hedges, and at least one man had fallen into a fountain while attempting to leap over it as a shortcut. The guests departed thoroughly impressed by the fountains and even more impressed by the king's ability to pretend he hadn't noticed what looked like an entire staff playing an elaborate game of garden tag. From that day forward, the fountains were known as Les Grandes Eaux, the Great Waters, though the servants privately called them Les Grandes Courses, the Great Races. Mozart Salon Shenanigans. Picture a Viennese salon filled with powdered wigs and expensive snuff boxes. Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart, already famous for his musical genius, had a reputation not just for brilliant compositions, but for turning concerts into comedy shows. On this well-documented evening, Mozart announced to his audience, "Ladies and gentlemen, perhaps you've seen a pianist play. But have you seen one play? Backwards?" With that, he crossed his arms completely, right hand playing the treble notes, left hand on the bass, exactly opposite of how one should play. The audience gasped as he launched into a complex piece, his crossed arms looking like a pretzel, yet producing perfect music. But Mozart wasn't finished. As verified in his own letters to his sister Handel, he proceeded to hit several perfect notes with his nose, bouncing along the keyboard like a well-dressed woodpecker. "I find my nose to be quite musical today," he declared, playing a recognizable tune while his hands were dramatically clasped behind his back. The real kicker came when he combined both tricks, playing with crossed hands while occasionally leaning in for a nose-struck note. One contemporary account describes the audience torn between admiration for his skill and helpless laughter at the spectacle. Count Zichy, who was present that evening, wrote in his diary, "Mozart made music as if it were a joyful game, yet never once sacrificed the quality of his performance to his antics." Even Emperor Joseph II, who witnessed similar performances, had to admit, "Too many notes? Perhaps, but too much entertainment? Never." These tricks weren't just showing off. Mozart was proving a point he often made: music should be joyful. As he wrote to his father Leopold, "People are amazed that the same hands that can play the most serious concertos can also make them laugh until they cry." Queen's Monket Tea Party. Princess Caroline's pet monkey Jacko was already famous in the court for his unusually refined manners, but nobody expected him to steal the show at one of Queen Anne's notorious formal tea parties. The scene was set in Hampton Court Palace. The cream of English society had gathered, performing the elaborate ritual of afternoon tea with all the seriousness of a state ceremony. Ladies balanced their enormous hooped skirts on tiny chairs, while gentlemen adjusted their best wigs, everyone pretending the room wasn't stiflingly hot. Jacko, who was supposed to be safely confined to Princess Caroline's chambers, had other plans. The first indication of his escape was a slight commotion among the servants, who were trying desperately to catch him without disturbing the proceedings. The monkey, dressed in his custom-made coat, yes, he really had one, managed to evade capture and made his way to the tea party. Instead of causing chaos as everyone feared, Jacko calmly climbed into an empty chair, sat up straight, and proceeded to observe the proceedings with an air of refined interest. The assembled nobles froze, teacups suspended mid-air, as Jacko reached for a napkin and delicately placed it on his lap. He then picked up a teacup, thankfully empty, and extended his pinky finger in perfect imitation of the ladies present. Queen Anne, known for her gravity, watched as Jacko proceeded to mirror the exact movements of Lady Marlborough across the table. When the lady adjusted her wig, Jacko patted his head. When she dabbed her mouth with a napkin, he did the same. The breaking point came when Jacko spotted a plate of biscuits. He didn't grab them as everyone expected. Instead, he carefully selected one, broke it in half, just as the Queen herself always did, and pretended to offer the other half to his neighbor with a gracious nod. The Queen's famous composure finally cracked. Her laughter broke the tension, and soon the entire room was in hysterics. Even the normally stern Archbishop of Canterbury was seen wiping tears of mirth from his eyes. From that day forward, Jacko became an unofficial guest at court tea parties, though he was eventually banned after an incident involving a wig, a cup of tea, and an unfortunately placed bowl of cream. We must add that although Jacko was a real pet, we took some liberties with the facts.